All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today. Thank you for joining us for our discussion on reinventing sensory profiling for competitive benchmarking. So I'm Greg Stucky. I'm from InsightsNow, and I'm delighted that you're joining us for this exciting conversation with Daniel and Marcia, two product visionaries who've been reimagining sensory profiling for competitive benchmarking and analysis. So welcome to both of you. Glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks. Great to be here, Greg. Thank you very much.
All right, for those of you who don't know them, Daniel, he's a relative newcomer to the sensory field. He's got his MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business and started his career in business and marketing, but kind of was influenced by his wife. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit of that story. And in 2017, he launched FlavorWiki. Well, that's a company where it looks at the gap between how researchers went about doing product profiling and what was intuitive to him as a marketer, right? So I've had the pleasure of knowing Daniel for, I don't know, 6-9 months now, and I'm excited for him to be able to tell you a little bit more about his genesis story and the vision he had. Now, Marcia is a person I actually grew up hearing about in school. Like, she and I've been around for a long time, it feels like. And I had the pleasure to work with her a few times over the years. She's always been able to see beyond the standard and accepted best practices of the field and find new ways to expand knowledge and insights and build smarter, faster solutions. One of the things I like about Marcia, she's really got a knack for seeing how to keep things simple in a field where everything's really quite complex. So it's an honor to have you here, and I'm delighted for everybody to get to hear your experiences with how you're changing benchmarking as well. All right, so a little housekeeping first. If you have questions for Daniel and Marcia, questions about benchmarking, questions about sensory profiling, please drop them into the Q&A, and I'll answer them. If I can drop them in as we go, great, but at the end, we'll have a longer Q&A time as well. Let's kick it off today by talking about why we even care about competitive benchmarking and sensory profiling. So simply put, it's a race to become number one. And competitive benchmarking tells us how we're tracking with the competition and what we can do to either maintain our position as a leader or to improve our position and take over first place. And it's not really a simple task. And it's also not the type of race where you get to like rest on your laurels a little bit or take long breaks, because your competition is always striving to catch up and extend their lead. So we use competitive benchmarking analysis for a wide range of opportunities and values for strategic planning, right? Knowing what your competition is doing and where they're likely to go so that you can set your strategy, proving your value in sales conversations. There's nothing like being able to show data that shows that you're number one when you're trying to get on the shelf, right? Or strike a new deal. For renovation purposes, knowing how to shift your current products and maybe what line extensions are going to help you take more share. For actual innovation work, finding opportunistic white space, looking at where maybe a newcomer in the field might be somebody you might want to be acquiring as well. And then for just general education, like teaching yourself and other people in your group about a new category. When you come into a brand new category, assigned a new category to be in charge of, there's really no faster way to come up to speed than to do a benchmarking study or read benchmarking research. All right, so today, going a little bit faster here than I wanted to. So these past few weeks, I've been talking with people about their biggest challenges when it comes to benchmarking. I heard a lot of stories and quite a few challenges. And near the top of the list was really, what kind of data do I collect? Because there's so many options. Like, what's most valuable when we do benchmarking work? And then when I ask people to really think a little bit deeper on that, one of the common themes, aside from like sales and advertising information, was the consumer acceptance and the sensory profiles. And most were doing some type of product trial assessment, mostly CLTs or home use tests to get an overall liking score. And then sending the top of products in that set to be evaluated by trained sensory descriptive panels. And most were using some type of liking drivers style assessment, and they found them generally quite helpful in finding ways to optimize a product. But most of them complained that they didn't really see that data as being realistic to the market, and all of the benchmarking data tend to be siloed. Packaging people doing packaging things, brand people doing brand things, product people doing product things. And so they were having a hard time aggregating across the space as well. All right. So one of the things that I got excited about then was the idea of reinventing benchmarking and the types of information in context, actually getting into the moments where people are using products, because I think that was one of the biggest missing pieces. We've got all these blind tastings, blind trial work, either or in central locations or even at home with blinded products. So they weren't really truly the way people were experiencing them in real life. So we're missing a key component. And that's really what struck me as kind of odd, was that lack of behaviorally in context data, which brings me to why I was really excited to bring Daniel and Marcia here today, because this is an area where they've actually been reinventing how we do collect information from consumers. So Daniel, when I first met you, I got to hear like how you launched the company, how you launched into the world of sensory profiling and benchmarking. So if you wouldn't mind telling that story again, I'd love for everybody listening to be able to hear about your aha moment and how that brought about.
Sure. Thanks so much, Greg, and thanks everybody at InsightsNow for inviting us to do this. It's really great to be here. Yeah, so mine is kind of a story of happenstance and discovery. As you mentioned, I'm a newcomer. I mean, I wouldn't even use the word newcomer. When I came into starting FlavorWiki, I had zero knowledge of consumer science or sensory science or any of that area. My background is business, finance, and e-commerce. Yeah, I'm from the U.S. I live in Switzerland now, but I went to Stanford Business School, but in 2007 I graduated and came over to Europe, and since then I've done a bunch of different type of roles. And the thing that I did before starting FlavorWiki was I was running the operation in Europe for a company called Groupon, which some people might in the US still remember. It was a kind of a big e-commerce player for a while. And one of the responsibilities I had there was, thinking about marketing and how we could more appropriately sell products to consumers, right? Like how could we get people to buy our products and like them? And what I noticed was that there was a lot of information about people that we had in our database, and there was a lot of information about the products that they sold, but there wasn't a lot of information about why people had bought the products that they had purchased. And in particular, I found this kind of interesting when it came to things that like, chocolate or food or, things like that, where there were these descriptive attributes. And again, not knowing anything about sensory, I probably wouldn't even have known that word descriptive attribute in my vocabulary at that time. This was about 2015. As you mentioned, I had the good fortune of marrying somebody who's a food scientist, works at one of the big flavor houses here in Switzerland. And I just was really fascinated with the industry, having been around a bunch of industries and worked in the investment space. And I'd never heard really about food science at all. And so I think that this whole kind of process, which everyone on the webinar is probably pretty intimately aware of, about how food products get created and get made and get validated, it's really not something that most people are aware of. And even at a place like Stanford, I didn't know anybody that really had any background in this kind of thing. So I was really fascinated by the industry, and the more and more I kind of looked at it, I started kind of chatting with people I knew and people I was able to get in touch with through my network about an idea that I had, which how could we get more product information into these marketing databases so we could try to match products to people, not just like, hey, look, this person bought like a green sweater, so we should show them green clothes, but something that's more specific about what the drivers of liking, another word I didn't have in my vocabulary at the time, but like the reasons why people buy a product. And in these conversations, eventually someone who had much more experience in this than me said, well, look, what you're really describing is a lot of kind of how we structure market research. And so I took that kind of away and started thinking about what we could do with respect to maybe digital. I also recognize that the food industry maybe wasn't the most digitized industry in the world at that moment, and perhaps there was an opportunity for me to do something that I could bring, my skill set to. And the thing that came up is sensory. I mean, I think the thing that's very unique about food and also, some consumer good products like dishwashing detergents and makeups and other things that we use everyday life, it has this abstract descriptive element. Like, how do you describe the chocolate you love or the wine you love or the candy bar you love? It's really hard for normal people to do that. And it was hard for me to do it too, so it was immediately recognizable that this was something that was quite unique to this kind of industry, which led me to, meet more sensory scientists and learn more about what they do. Long story short, and no offense to anyone on the call, I just looked at these methods and I said, well, look, they seem to work very well. They're obviously very well developed, and there's no doubt that they work well, but they don't seem to be the fastest thing in the world. And I was coming out of a situation in e-commerce where if you don't react to what your consumers are doing on the web page, in the morning, you might lose sales that are going to hurt you for your daily sales. I mean, we were tracking sales by the hour in this case. Obviously, the food innovation cycle works much differently than that, but I was coming from this kind of standard of fast, agile, how do we do agile measurement? And therefore, one of the things that was very clear to me is that, well, how would you do this kind of profiling aspect, but do it outside of a lab? Because, getting a lab together, I think everybody will agree, there's a lot of logistics behind it. There's clearly a lot of costs and things behind it. And so how would we be able to mass aggregate that information, which is where I started from. Down the road, meeting a lot of people, meeting people like Marcia and doing pilots. And, we were able to get some pilots early with very, very early. And, I think even some of the people that might even be on the call now that, like also worked with us in the beginning, we learned a bit about, I think my vision of like the speed was a little bit overzealous, shall we say. I mean, it wasn't really necessary to be that fast. But the idea was to develop this kind of way of getting this same similar information that you would get from a sensory panel, that we could get it faster and use it in particular scenarios where speed and cost constraints were a factor, right? I didn't really necessarily intend it to be a replacement because I didn't really even know what I was replacing. I just wanted to be able to make this measurement and get some actionable data. And that's kind of how it started, right? And I think since then, everything that we've done has been a learning experience. And we actually have a patent now on this methodology, which was granted last year in the United States. And more and more, of course, we're discovering ways in which also the industry can use it in certain and appropriate situations. So that's what we do. Along the way, we did a lot of things like build a huge consumer community and learn how to do field work and all of the rest of that. But that's basically the background of it. And
well, that's a tremendous story. I love how your brain, comes at this challenge by trying to figure out really what's happening, right? Like how do we connect with people in the moment? How do we get that information faster in order that we become more relevant to them? Really, that's really at the end of the day, the thing that matters most about this type of information is because you really want to be relevant to the person. You want to be delivering things that delight and excite them, change their behavior in their life. And so, I think that's one of the things that just for me is, seeing that similar genesis behind our ideas of how do we be innovative has been a lot of fun. But now let's talk about this question type. So you've talked about it, you called it the paired question type. So the paired question type's a different style. It's more of a choice-based style question. So in sensory, like this is, when I've done in-moment oriented sensory profiles with consumers in the past, I've used techniques like ideal point profiling, which a lot of people on the call should know, where you have a full long scale and you ask them how intense an attribute is, and you ask them eventually, to compare products, and then say, hey, well, what's your ideal level of intensity for that attribute as well? So you get this nice profile. You've got the ability to see where they want it and where products are today, how far off you are. Now, inherently, that's a slow technique. It's very laborious. It's very taxing mentally technique on people as well. So you came at the problem just partly because you didn't know one way or the other. You came at the problem a different way and built this paired question. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, you can look at scaling. Like, sensory was originally described to me as what you consider, I think, spectrum method right now. At first, that's kind of what I learned about the reference aromas. I think at one point a flavor house said, "Look, let me give you this box of reference aromas and take them home." And you know, I was like, "Well, this is no way I'm going to ship this to a consumer. Like that's never going to happen." So at the end of the day, I wanted to develop something that was simple. And you know, I was just rooting around and trying to think of things that could work. And I found some research that was being done by a social scientist at Princeton in New Jersey, looking at kind of choice-based analysis. And I think a lot of people would liken this kind of thing to a little maybe like a simple conjoint analysis now. Again, something not in my vocabulary at the time. But what this gentleman was doing is he was just giving people simple choices between A and B. And because he had the ability to ask so many people the same question between many different choices, he was able to kind of create this like statistical stack ranking of this information. I said, oh, you know, that methodology of collecting the data seems very simple. And if you were able to reach many people, maybe that would work, even though it was obvious to any observer that, you know, you would have a little bit of noise in the data because you would have some people answering in different ways. And I just started experimenting with that. And you know, at the same time, I was interacting with people in the food industry, mostly in the U.S., that had background in that. I had brought on somebody to help me who had a background in the chocolate industry. And so, with that backdrop, we started using this idea of saying, well, look, if we give people just two things to choose from, A or B, which is just simply stronger, can they choose that intuitively? And if we keep doing that and giving them different kind of selections and pairs in such a way that there's no way they can game the system, shall we say, then perhaps we can end up with a bunch of information which we can feed into an algorithm and create a similar output that would match a panel. One of the challenges, of course, is finding a panel that's accurate, that is you can compare to, right? So like still to this day, whenever we get a chance to like work with people that have trained panelists, we love it because like when we license our software, we love it because then we get actually a lot of information about how to think about where the algorithm is successful and where it can create really accurate discriminations and where it has deficiencies. And there's certainly areas of the kind of depth of analysis and sensory that our capability does not match, right? Like if you're doing
Sure.
20, 30 attributes, it doesn't work that far. But for consumers who anyway have a pretty limited vocabulary of understanding descriptive, it works very quickly and it's fast and it gives you a pretty good picture of the differences between products, which is very helpful in these benchmarking studies because it's quick. And particularly if you have like many products you want to deal with, then doing that with a trained panel is like very, very costly, obviously. So that has some advantages in certain cases. Right. So,
Right,
yeah.
for sure. And Marcia, this is really where you started coming into the equation, right? So
Correct.
you were what at Mondelez at the time when
Mm-hmm.
Daniel was kicking off the company, right? And you were one of the
Yep.
first people like he was talking
Yep.
about that really kind of jumped on this crazy idea and
Mm-hmm.
said, "Hey, maybe there's something here. Let's play with it a little bit." So
Mm-hmm.
uh
Yep.
tell me about how that came about and
Sure.
what you saw as exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I had colleagues who saw Daniel at a Kickstarter in Zurich, and they thought it was intriguing. They were part of our breakthrough innovation group. And they came back and said, hey, you know, maybe you should talk to this guy. He's doing some stuff that, you know, we think could be useful, especially with this breakthrough group that Mondelez had. You know, they didn't have a lot of R&D resources. They were, you know, out there being kind of the entrepreneurs within Mondelez and looking for ways, you know, as they talked about transactional learning and working with consumers differently and so forth and doing different approaches to product evaluation. So they were like, hey, why don't you give him, you know, a call and see what he's up to? So I did and met with Daniel and had conversation. And just as, you know, he was talking here just now, was kind of intriguing in terms of how he came about, you know, developing the platform, developing an algorithm, you know, working on the patent for this. And what seemed to me as I was talking with him A few things that that I liked was, one, that you had the ability to do digital, right? That, you know, if someone has a phone, they can get to this survey, they can evaluate your sample. Two, that he was building his own communities. So it's like a social media platform where people opt in to be part of the community, which also would have allowed me to say, hey, you know, if I want to test something with a group of people and 2 weeks later, I want to go back and, you know, have them purchase a sample or try something, I'm able to do that because I know, you know, Daniel has the ability to know, you know, who they are, but still protecting all the, you know, security with regards to identity and so forth. So that was intriguing to me. And then we got a little bit more talking about this paired question. And I was like, it's kind of interesting because those people who know me know that I am a very big proponent of descriptive analysis and always have been throughout my career. And it's something that I value highly, and what it offers to an organization with regard to getting valid, reliable data about the profiles of your products and being able to use them along with your liking information for modeling and so forth. So I was kind of intrigued to say, well, there are occasions where, one, we have capacity issues, time issues, cost issues. We don't necessarily have trained panels at Mondelez for the, you know, thousands of products that were manufactured. And so I was like, could this be an approach that might supplement or complement what we had for our QDA panels? And so that was kind of like, well, yeah, let me kind of play around with this and see what it might be able to offer us. And so I worked with Daniel. We did pilots. I did products in 4 different countries across the big categories that Mondelez had. And of course, I looked at products that we already had all this descriptive information. So I knew how the products compared to, in this case, it's competition. And we ran these tests because the other thing, of course, we weren't sure is what happens blind versus branded, because we were having these people go out and purchase products to try. And I was very pleased with what we got back. Now, again, this is, you're not going to get a full profile of your products because you're only going to test 12 to 15 attributes with the consumer, and you've got to make sure that they're consumer friendly and relevant, both to what you need and what you know about your products and what the consumer can comprehend. So it was a nice complement. We got similar data. I wouldn't say it was 100%, but it was 85, 90% the same. We wouldn't have made any different decisions based on the data. Those products that were close were close. Those products that were different, and they were different in the same ways. But those of you, you know, who are familiar with a QDA scale, of course, it's unstructured. And the beauty of that as well is, you know, not just getting a value of a magnitude, but the relative difference between products. So products could be significantly different and have a large magnitude of difference or a small magnitude of difference, but it's still, you know, significant. So some of those things, you know, would have a potential of being different between what a FlavorWiki profile would get you versus a trained panel. But we didn't make any different decisions based on that. So I was very pleased with that. And in addition, we got some other information with regards, in this case, with regards to purchase. How easy was it to find in the store? We got pictures of the products from the consumer. So if you ever, you know, worried about damage or, you know, how things end up showing up on the shelf, the age of the products, because the consumers are taking pictures of date codes and so forth. You can look at price because we're asking how much they paid for the product when they go out and purchase it. And you can get a geographic distribution, not just, you know, within a country, but between countries if a product, you know, happens to be made in multiple locations. So I thought all of that was really beneficial. And again, it doesn't take the place of a trained panel, but it does complement. And we've seen it actually work quite nicely. with some of our clients in terms of modeling, that you can run your data analysis if you're benchmarking and, even within a category, to look at both the profiles you get from the consumers and the profiles you get from your trained panel, and model both of those to see whether or not there are any inconsistencies there. And if they are, how would you address them, and why would they be as such?
Yeah, that's really good. And certainly the comparison between the two, the consumer language and the descriptive language, trained descriptive language, certainly there's going to be big differences there. What I really get excited about is that it's the map essentially between how the marketers and brand talk about their products and how we get to describe them, and the language that consumers use to explain products to each other, and then the technical, more deeper drill down areas that get you in. So it's really, I feel like it's this great overlay that lets you get that information. Now, we do have a few questions. I want to pull one question in because it seems relevant right now, and that's, do you ask consumers to go out and purchase products themselves and record date codes? How does that work? So what's most common?
The most common scenario that we work with is that we'll screen in consumers from our group or recruit them, and our whole recruiting model is also just another whole discussion, but that we will basically get those people to screen in and get the right quota of recruit requirement, and then we ask people to go out and buy the product, and they don't necessarily do it. So that's why we also have to recruit a lot of people, because we're not incentivizing them very highly. Right. So we have a lot of people that do it. We don't expect them to do it. If they don't do it, we don't penalize them, but we definitely observe their behavior, and they'll go out, they'll buy it. As you mentioned, Greg and Marcia, if there's interest in understanding the store, the purchase experience, either online or in the store, however it's purchased, we can capture some of that. And then they bring it home and they do the review. And if there is interest in capturing things like the date code or the UPC, we can capture all that and record it and bring all that data. That's the common case. That's the quickest case. Of course, it can also be that product's not in the market, and so then there's options to get the product to those people, either be shipping it to them, or if they're going to pick it up, or right now we're working on a project where we have like certain retailers that are getting a bulk of the product, and then we're sending people to those specific stores. So we figure out how to make that happen. And but the most common case is products that are out there purchasable in the market. Right?
Yeah, and that, to me, I actually think this is one of the things that we often kind of overlook when we're doing benchmarking, is the whole influence of the entire shopping trip experience, store in your home, et cetera, so forth. So really having that full understanding of that, getting that full experience is the way to prime people into before you're gathering the data of product use, because it is a big component of the process, right? You're working with the packaging, working, with shelf sets, you're trying to find the product on shelf, et cetera, so forth. I know that, when we've sent people shopping before, sometimes they send us pictures of the shelf and go, it's not anywhere to be found. And you're looking at the picture going, it's right there in the middle. I can see it. But I think that in and of itself is also a big piece of that benchmarking and really understanding people's connection with the product, the brand, the experience itself. So I think that has some really unique additional values. Perhaps doesn't apply to every single situation, but certainly a lot of value. Let's see.
Well,
I
mean, I just to elaborate on that. I mean, again, I come from the background of what does the business want to achieve, and business is run by selling their products and making their customers happy, right? And we recognize that there are different departments and have different responsibilities for different parts of the product experience and development, but at the end of the day, what you really care about is why does my customer buy my product, and what could I do differently to make them buy more of it, right? And so that involves the entire experience around the product, the brand, the awareness, the advertising, the imagery. All of those things form that complete mental and emotional picture of why people make a behavior, basically, right?
Right. Well, and that kind of goes into this another question we have here, which is the attributes being selected. You mentioned there is fewer attributes coming into this. How do you ensure that you got the right ones?
Yeah.
How do you
a
ensure the
great-
consumers understand them too?
Yeah,
Like
go
what?
ahead,
Yeah.
Marcia. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead. Marcia.
There's a couple of ways you can approach that. One, you might, in terms of having an internal capability already and having a language developed and working with the client to say, okay, let's go through these. What are the ones that, are most critical for your drivers of liking? Can be that conversation. It can be, if you're looking to investigate a particular component of the product. Maybe you're thinking that, you have a problem with shelf life or, conformance to, and from, a design perspective in the plant, you want to focus there. Is it a category thing, right? Who are the players and what are the actual differences in the sample set that you're looking at? And making sure that the attributes are covered in that way. So it really depends on a discussion. So, we could, based on our experience in a product category, say, well, we could look at the language and say, these are the ones that we think are most consumer friendly. And in most cases, you can have a honest and open dialogue with your client about that. They have the information, or if they don't, then we offer our expertise in that to select the attributes. Sometimes what we've done is have the product sampled by the train panel and look at the differences in the samples based from the train panel and then use those attributes with the consumer. We've done a similar thing to say, let's run a test with a bunch of consumers and your language, and let's see if there's any confusion out there and difficulties with a particular attribute. Because what happens with the paired question, the way the algorithm and the machine learning is coming into play. So if you have an attribute that consumer truly doesn't understand, and it's going to be presented to them in combination with all of the other attributes that are in the set of language. And if they don't understand it, and every time the other attribute gets picked as higher because they just don't understand that word, you're going to get distorted data. Because the algorithm and the machine learning is going to look at that and it's like, well, it's not present, it's not present, it's not present, when it may be just an attribute they don't understand. So it really is a discussion with the client to make sure that we have the best attributes possible. And we've even run some small little pilot tests to ensure that the language is good with the consumer.
Right, right. Well, and I think that's kind of brings me to a third part of the descriptive field, if you will, that we tend not to talk about, and that's what I would consider professional or expert panels. And these are when it's mostly, we talk about it in the industry as benchtop tasting, right? But it's us as professionals all getting around. Sometimes, you bring in your chefs, et cetera, so forth, and you get around and you're just evaluating the products themselves, and you're trying to make those decisions using professional language as to what's unique, what's different as well. And so certainly I think you're right, looking at a combination of ways to get to that attribute set, but certainly we have to put on the consumer understanding space to be able to figure out what is the language that they use. Certainly it comes from a lot of qualitative work. If you've got any lead work in the space, certainly there. You can also use good AI tools out there. How are these products being described on the market today? Boom. And you can just go get basically the top marketing words being used across all the products, or ask it to go, your system would go look up reviews of products. What are the most common words used in reviews? And certainly can give you hints, but you're right, it's more of a discussion. It's why we have people who are experts in sensory. We want to talk with them, and experts in culture too, right? Because the same word changes culture to culture. So
yeah,
all
that's
right.
huge. In language translation is a big deal, right? Like when we do a lot of work in foreign countries, and we always have local language speakers, usually at the client level, checking. And the attributes is one that really comes up. Like, what does that really mean? And is that the right attribute in the right language? That's important. Yeah. So
Right. Let's see, another one. We've been mostly talking about CPG type products here. Application space, QSR. pet food, you
Yeah.
name it. What's
Yeah.
this technique works for lots of different spaces?
Mhm.
Yeah, so QSR definitely is, I mean, I think it's like the perfect application, right? Because QSR, that's when people are always on the go, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the product is prepared. I mean, unfortunately, I don't eat at McDonald's that often or places like that. But you know, it could come out in a lot of variability, right? Like in terms of like how it's prepared. So I think that that's from a kind of just a quality and benchmarking understanding, a really good application. We've done plenty of those. Pet food, it does work technically. What we've done some work in pet food, what we discovered is that our community is very food focused and not as much pet focused. So if we ever go into, you know, really being a pet food testing company, I think that we'll probably have to kind of like do a little bit of special recruiting around that. But technically, the technology works for all the modalities. We've also used it for like emotional testing and things like that. Anything that you can think of where it's a very abstract description, like how do you describe how you feel? I mean, this is super abstract if you ask a different person how they feel or what their emotional state is, but how do you put that in kind of a structured setting? So I guess the answer is like, yes, it works, but we have more and less experience in certain domains as a company.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I would say a couple of key areas, again, because of the community that we use and how big it is. So say if you were looking at an OTC, if you wanted to look at a nasal decongestant or a cough syrup, a throat lozenge, right? We can go out and get people who are sick in the moment to get that product and try it. Right. If you are, you know, using things on your skin, if you have dry skin, if you want to check things between winter and summer, or if it's, you know, hair removal, people are able to use it as they normally would in their home and give you that evaluation right there on their phone as they're using the product. And, you know, Daniel touched upon the you know, quick serve. You know, if you go to the counter, you order it, you sit down, you eat it, you're filling out the scorecard right there. The French fries are warm, or they should be. Again, that might be a piece of information that you want to know. Right? The beverage is cold, or, you know, spirits, right? If the people are already at a facility, and, you know, enjoying a beer, you can get the information right there while they're on their phone.
Yeah. And that really comes back to why I keep getting so excited about this, because at the end of the day, like Daniel, you pointed out, I mean, what are we in business for, right? As a business, we have to win the moment. We have to get people to experience our product, become aware, experience our products, try our products, integrate them into their lives somehow, somewhere. And it's our job as researchers to already know ahead of game where that's going to happen and how that should take place, right? So that we have a really good predictability and a good confidence that launching a product's worth the money to do so. And so being able to get in context and win that specific moment and create experiences that really drive that behavior forward is something that I think is super exciting. And I think that this technique offers one little additional piece that starts to blend those pieces together. And that allows us to get more behavioral data. And even Marcia, you had mentioned before, like, it's not always about liking, right? It could be about other characteristics, like repeat purchase might be way more important in this particular case. So, I mean, have you used anything like that with what you've been trying?
Well, we certainly have looked at the like VIP analysis to look just, you know, beyond just overall liking as to what is important. And, you know, nowadays, you know, with the world the way it is, there's many different things coming at consumers in terms of the things that they value. You know, the landfills, you know, the sustainability, the price, availability. So there's many things that also come into play, that, you know, you want to be able to measure it. If you can measure it and understand it, then you can make the best choice and recommendation for your company, right? In addition to having, say, a trained panel information and getting liking on the products, having
Yeah.
other information to supplement that and to help you to make a decision can be quite valuable.
Right, right. And I think that's the thing that I think is unique, because you could even use this as a tracking, right? So you could identify people that you want to track over time to see if you're actually making a difference in their life. Likewise, you can look at trade-offs, right? So
Yeah.
if it's not just about understanding what drives a certain value, like, desirability, but actually stepping out and looking at, well, what trade-offs are they making? So, well,
Mhm.
yeah, will I trade off, say, liking for sustainability? And we
Correct.
certainly know that people will in many situations, in many cases. So where are those opportunities to do so? And then what are the sensory signals that tell us
Mhm.
that they're making the right
Yep.
choice?
Well, one of the other things, again, because of the community that we have, so we can ask, how likely you would be to repurchase the product, but we can also monitor and find out whether or not they did, in fact, go out and repurchase the product. And if they did, to come back, try it. Why did you purchase it again? So again, because of the way the community operates, we can, in fact, monitor repeat purchase of whether or not, people, if they do, in the study, you ask them, if they do go out and repurchase the product, rather than asking how likely you would be to repurchase the product, you can ask them, if they do go out and repurchase the product, to please inform us, let us know, and we'll send them another scorecard and we'll get the information from them. How far, from the test did it happen? How did they feel about the product then, and so forth.
Okay. All right. So go ahead.
I was going to say there's some good questions, and I was
Yeah,
wondering if I could
that's what I
hijack
was
and
just
choose a
getting
few.
to.
Okay.
I was
So-
just getting to. I'm like, boy, there are some fantastic questions in here that we have got to jump on. And if you haven't already been asking, we've got a good group here already, and I'll start pushing through a few. But one of the ones I think, just to maybe complete a little bit more about more methodological sample size. I mean, how long does a study like this take?
So if it's a kind of a benchmark that has somewhere between 4 and 6 products, you're talking about, by the time we have the questionnaire, somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks to get the data. And then depending upon how much reporting you want done, we do a lot of reporting in our dashboard, and then obviously raw data. And then some clients want more reporting than others. So you're talking about, like, within a month, you can do one of these.
Right.
Some that are very big, like 50 plus products, can take a little bit longer.
Sure.
Sample size depends upon, we can set up like sequential monadic or incomplete block or monadic design. Monadic design has been really popular with customers that do a lot of this benchmarking, because then they can compare results between tests, right?
Yep.
And with a monadic design, 150 to 200 per product is a good response. But with sequential monadic, you can get away with, sometimes people even will do 80. It really depends on how like homogeneous the category is. And most of the number of responses is driven by the requirement for statistical significance of difference when it comes to liking.
Yeah.
Our actually own algorithm, we only require maybe 20 or 30 people to do it in order to
Sure.
get the data. So
Yeah, much more like a traditional panel
Yeah.
sample size. So, and then final question on methods components before I jump on to a few other topics is, you talked about them being motivated differently, right? This is less about monetary motivation, which, as somebody who focuses on behavior, actually is pretty exciting, because I think that's one of going to a lot of tests. I think anybody who's been on here and who attends studies live, you'll know there's always those people, tons of those people. They're just sitting there looking bored out of their minds because they're getting their $50, $20, whatever it's going to be for that particular test. You don't really focus on driving people into the community because of money.
Right. So in a classical thing where people are going out and buying it, they'll get a reimbursement for the value of the product. That's about it. Right.
Gotcha, yeah.
Some products that are hard to find, we might move that up a little bit, because people might have to go to 1 or 2 stores, and that motivates them a bit more. But we don't want them to be able to walk away with a significant amount of money. And the reason for that is that if you don't like a product category and you're not a natural consumer of that category, why would you buy it and test it and walk away with nothing? right?
Right.
Whereas if you're going to walk away with $20 extra in your pocket because you showed up at whatever testing center, well, you might just grin and bear it and lie and say that you like that product, right? So we found
Right,
that
right.
we actually played around a lot with this. And I mean, we found that it's a trade-off. Like if you have a lower incentive, we have to work much harder to get people to come in and take the survey, because many people will screen in, and if it's not convenient for them to go to the store, they won't do it. So we have to manage that, right? Like to
Yeah, yeah.
get 100 responses, we may have a few thousand people that screen in. But the flip side of that is you get better quality information, right? And you don't attract people that are kind of making a little household business out of it. It happened once or twice in some cases that we've kind of like the test went viral, and then you start to see that the behavior of some of these people that really understand product testing and how to kind of make it a little bit of a side stream of income, they know what they're doing. And we try to not have those people around, and we'll even blacklist them if we see that people are exhibiting that kind of behavior. They just basically log in and never see any studies. And so I would say we're getting much more extreme about not allowing certain people in who exhibit those kind of ingenuine behaviors. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really good. And I see there is one more question, a little more tactical. Do you ask things like purchase intent with the paired question? That's a no, right? You've got the paired questions really for attribute profiling, and then all the other normal question types apply to doing research, right?
We've used it in a lot of other cases too,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And so sometimes clients will bring these questionnaires where they'll have like, we want this multiple select question, like choose as many as you want, and they have like a list of 50 items, and we're like, look, no one is going to look at this list, so we can get a much more quality result if we convert that into using kind of the pairing response.
Okay, so some certainly makes sense.
Yes, some cases it just the efficiency of it, we found it's useful, right?
Yeah,
So,
and then another one is the pairing of qualitative and quantitative information here. I know, Marcia, what's your experience with this? Is this like traditional approaches, flexible? What's the
Well,
opportunity?
it's definitely flexible. So again, it could be something that you decide ahead of time that, we're going to do a quantitative test, and then we're going to follow up with qualitative. The qualitative, you could wait till you see the information and then select respondents to go and talk to. You could do it one-on-one. You could do it in an online group. If you happen to do the test in a particular location and you want to bring people in, you could do that. The client could do the one-on-one after with the respondent, or FlavorWiki can set that up. It really is whatever's going to be best to meet the needs of the client in terms of the qualitative. In some cases, we've done just straight qualitative work for people, without a quantitative component as well. But the nice thing is that you can go back to the exact people that, you're probably not going to get all 150 who did the test to say, oh yeah, I'd be willing to to talk to someone about what I just did, or more about my feelings on this. But you'll certainly get more than enough, and if we want to target specific consumers, we can do that.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing about that. I mean, we're, as a company, quite focused on maximizing our potential as like a data collection and digitization and leveraging data. We can do qualitative work, as Marcia mentioned, and we have a network of people to do that, but we're very open to, I think, just getting the qualitative work done. When a client has a qualitative piece, if they want to bring their own moderator, or they want to do the moderation and they want us to do the recruit or whatever, like we want to be flexible in terms of how we interface, even with other, we've worked with other service providers in that regard, but our focus is on really doing a very good job in this descriptive area and the recruit data and the quant piece. We definitely can do qual, but it's we're totally open to working with other providers for these types of areas. Right? So
Gotcha.
yeah.
So we're getting close to the top of our hour. Got about a few more minutes left, just about 5 more minutes left. One question, I mean, there is a lot of really good questions on here. One, we've answered in part many of them. Some of them we'll have to just follow up on. But one of the ones that's got my attention is like, what's the main challenge you face for people trying to bring this method into their company? Like, what's how do you get people excited, or what challenges do they face, or what kind of information should they be aware of?
Can I go first, Marcia?
Sure.
I think that there's two areas where I see there's a struggle. Like, of course, normally we get into a conversation and there's at least one person in a company that really believes that this would be a great thing to try, right? That if there's nobody, then there's no conversation. And I think there's two areas where I see them struggle. One is in this reconciliation between where does traditional sensory versus what we're doing fit, right? And I think that that's a matter of kind of philosophical approach sometimes. It's a matter of whether or not we're kind of articulating that where we work versus traditional sensory. I think that's one area where we've seen, internal discussion around is it the right thing to do or not. And then the other thing is that sometimes people don't know whether or not this is something that belongs in like a consumer science R&D area or in a marketing and consumer insights area, because you're crossing the type of information that you're getting to get this kind of complete picture, right?
Right.
And I think they're just depending upon how different companies are structured in their different departments, that can be somehow something different than what they've dealt with before when they deal with other
Mm.
suppliers, basically. Right.
And I would just say that, having grown up in this industry, we're relatively slow to innovate. We get comfortable with what we've always done, and to do something different can bring risk. And people get afraid of that. What if I get a different answer than I got, before with the tests that I had before? Now I have to justify, or, I'm going to get questioned as to what is right, what is wrong. We tend to think of it as kind of a black and white thing. Did we get the right answer, or did we get not the right answer? And so it can make people really nervous in terms of trying something new. And I will say, even for myself, right, which was why I was like, all right, Daniel, I want to see this for myself. Let's run some pilots. I want to see this data and compare it to what I already have and what I already know, to say, do I think that it has some legs? And of course, we've done a lot of, pilots with people, because it is like, I have my core suppliers, I've spent a lot of energy and time and investing in those relationships. They do a good job for me, or I wouldn't be using them. And now someone else is coming in, with another idea or, approach. So people can be risk averse to that. So we try to be open and flexible to say, hey, it's not for everything. And again, the paired stuff doesn't replace, a good quality panel, but it does offer the digitization. It offers speed. You can get people out, purchasing your product and get other information. So it's a good complement, I think, to the things you might be doing today. And if there's a particular challenge that you have, particularly around speed or access to consumers, or the context by which you need to test in, I think this is a great approach.
And at InsightsNow, I mean, for us, I mean, this is like an augment, right? This is the ability to layer in component pieces that we may have been doing traditionally, more like with a traditional home use test, or maybe doing in sequences and stages in the past. Now, with this ability, bringing it all together and having it all happen very, very quickly all in once. So bringing your speed and agility down. So being able to layer this in is, super valuable, because you can really pick and choose the component pieces you want to put in sequence, and then you're more focused. So you don't really have to look at it as a one versus the other. It's really saying, okay, well, what information is going to get us, like you said, to that point where we're going to understand what we need to do to stay focused and grow the market space. And that can either be something that you're doing ongoing over time, or something that's, just a point solution. The other thing about this that I've been super fascinated is its scalability, and I think that's one thing where traditional work is really gets handcuffed, and this one is really kind of reimagined a little bit of that whole mindset of scalability, because you talk, Daniel, about like sample size. You can keep it in the normal ranges, and that's great. But you could also, go monadic and go thousands and thousands of people, because the scalability of this is good. You couldn't imagine. People would shy away from even asking that question if you said, "Hey, give me a central location test with a monadic test of 2,000 people." Just not doable. I mean, nobody will
Yeah.
ever pay for that. But
Uh,
here, it's actually within reason, right? So all of a sudden, you change the game a little bit in terms of
Mhm.
inspiring good research design, and maybe different research design than you had in the
Yeah.
past.
And I'll just attest to the fact that, when I did this on one of our chocolates at Mondelez, we had to shut it down because they were like, we got over 1,000 responses within a day because,
Right.
in the UK, people eat a lot of chocolate.
Yeah.
So when we put it out there and put it out to the community, it was like, okay, stop. We don't need this much data. But, we had over 1,000 responses within a day.
That was an
Right,
expensive
right,
pilot,
that's
I
good.
remember. We went way over quota.
Oh no. Oh no.
Um,
Okay, so there's quite a few people who've asked some fairly technical questions. A lot of people asking to see some specific examples, case studies, things like that in here. The QR code that's on your screen, if you pop that, get in touch with us. You've got a lot of people's email. We're easy to find on LinkedIn as well. But if you connect with us through that QR code, we'll set up those meetings, and we'll send you documentation, or show you specifics, give you an example. Because, any time you get into a new thing, you want to be able to test it out a little bit, see it for yourself, see what it gives you, and know the limitations, right? So anything like that, certainly feel free. Daniel, there's some pretty cool business questions for you about being in the startup mode in that question set. So
yeah. I
I
mean,
don't know if we have
I wish you
time
had
to
more
address
time.
that, but
I can address, if you give me time for a few more questions, I'll address them. Otherwise, I mean, happy to put those down in writing and send them out to the group of people that have signed up. Whatever you want, Greg. I'm happy. I think that
okay.
there's some good
Well,
questions in there. So.
yeah, I was going to say, well, I think we're up on our hour certainly at
Yeah.
this point. But any last comments from the both of you?
I would just say that it's great to be here. From my perspective, I mean, Marcia's been in the industry for a while, but it's great to be here for me because, 5, 6 years ago, no one would ever have invited me to talk about this in a forum like this. So thanks for allowing us to do this, and thanks for taking notice. That's nice for me personally. So.
You're welcome.
Yep.
So.
And just to thank you for me as well, in terms of having the opportunity to talk about what FlavorWiki is doing and the innovation that it's bringing to the field. And then, Greg, in terms of some of these questions, will we just go
yeah.
ahead and answer them post and send out, or how will
Yes.
that work?
Yeah. So we'll send these are great questions. A lot of them most of them will write up a little short answer to, and then
Okay.
drop them in that way. Some of them, of course, we've already talked through on the call
Okay.
here.
Yeah,
But
some of them I did try
anyone
to
we didn't
answer.
get to that are easy to answer in short round. Some of them I think are like the startup one. I mean, that's its own like whole webinar right there, I think. Because I love the startup space.
Yeah.
But certainly, thank you very much. I
Okay.
always love talking with product visionaries and people who are approaching things unique and differently in the world, and trying to make people's lives better. And I think this is a really good blend of being able to see an opportunity to find some new reimagined methods for really getting products in people's hands and experiences in people's lives that we're going to improve them.
Great. Thanks so much for having us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody,
Super.
for watching and attending. Look forward. Don't feel shy to reach out. And these guys are going to be super available if you do. So look forward to talking with you all soon.
Have a good
Okay.
day.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.